This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. We begin today's show with recording from Tuesday's panel discussion on the role of innovation in global food systems. We hear from U.S. Representative Glenn Thompson of Pennsylvania, the chairman of the House Agriculture Committee, and dean of the K-State College of Agriculture and director of K-State Research and Extension, Ernie Minton. Kansas producer Chad Epler continues today's show by discussing his perspective on the value of the farms workshops at the 4-State Farm Show. We also hear from USDA's Rod Bain with new meat and poultry processing expansion grants from the USDA. We finish today's show with Rebecca McMahon, administrator of K-State's Local Food Systems Program and one of the authors of the new Kansas Garden Guide, to share about the guide. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today.
Listening to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. I'm Jeff Wickman. On Tuesday, the Farm Journal Foundation and Kansas State University hosted a panel discussion at the Stanley Stout Center on campus on the role of innovation in global food systems. The panel included U.S. Representative Tracy Mann of Kansas, U.S. Representative Glenn Thompson of Pennsylvania, the chairman of the House Agriculture Committee, Ambassador Greg Dowd, former chief agricultural negotiator with the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, and current vice president, global situational awareness and chief economist with Aimpoint Research, Tyler Lund, Kansas farmer ambassador for Farm Journal Foundation, and Ernie Minton, dean of K-State's College of Agriculture and director of K-State Research and Extension. Katie Lee, vice president for government affairs with Farm Journal Foundation, was the panel moderator. Today we highlight some of the thoughts and discussion from House Agriculture Committee Chairman Glenn Thompson and K-State's College of Agriculture Dean and Director of K-State Research and Extension, Ernie Minton.
Chairman Thompson, science, technology, and innovation, I've heard you say those words numerous times as you've traveled the country and you've listened to farmers and other partners in the ag space. Can you talk about why those issues are so important from your perspective, how crucial it will be to focus on these issues in the Farm Bill context? What does that look like for you? Where are you going to be really focusing your energy?
I use a pretty simple definition of American agriculture. It is 3 words: science, technology, and innovation. And it always has been. Those first settlers that came here from overseas and they unloaded the ships, and maybe they brought their wagon with them, or maybe they built their own, or maybe they bought one, right? And they loaded all their family up and their life possessions, and they started out from that ocean, depending on what direction they were coming from. And some of them got to a place where they looked around and they said, "This looks like home. This looks like, like Kansas. This looks like a great place, good soil. We can raise crops and raise kids." And they unloaded the wagon, they settled. And then I've been in a few places where I'm absolutely convinced that some of those folks kept going till the wheels fell off. And that's where they had to settle. And they made the best of it, right? And thank God with irrigation, they brought some of it along from being high desert into bread baskets. They used science. It was really crude and rudimentary. It was simple trial and error. And it was used for the purpose of, but for a righteous purpose, and that was to be able to produce enough more food so that fewer family members would die by the next harvest season. Well, today it's, American agriculture is so sophisticated. We got great leaders like the one I get to sit next to here, and all of his colleagues that lead as deans of our agriculture school, that lead these great, what I like to call farm teams, because that's what we call ourselves on the Ag Committee, who really lean into the fact that what we've done through science, technology, and innovation, the productivity of the American farmer has increased 287% since the 1940s. Now, with inflation, it's slipped a bit. Somebody smarter may figure it out. We're down to about 279 right now. We're making a commitment as we work on the Farm Bill, Katie, that we can, by applying science and technology innovation, we can take that productivity of American agriculture to 400% by the year 2035. And we live in an amazing time to be able to do that. And here's the thing, American agriculture is not static. It's dynamic. So as we work on this Farm Bill, applying these principles, and we apply these principles in a number of ways. I have incorporated those into the description of each of the 6 subcommittees. We will be leaning on science, technology, and innovation as a filter as we work and write each of the 12 titles and the subtitles of the Farm Bill. And so, incorporating that in such a way that we can achieve that goal. And I think with that, I don't think there's any issues we cannot resolve by applying that, and that's why we continue to lean in on that. And so a short answer, I guess, to your question is it critical? Absolutely.
Thank you for that. And Dr. Minton, I mean, the research that's happening here at K-State is just such a primary example of, I think, what the chairman's talking about and what we need to continue to lead on here in the United States. And I'd love to hear more from you on some of the highlights of what you're seeing in terms of the research being done here at K-State, how that's contributing not just to farmers here in the United States, but across the world. I know the Feed the Future Innovation Labs, I think K-State is leading 4 of them. Innovation coming out of those labs being scaled, the impact that can have is just tremendous. And I'd love to hear more from you to make it kind of real for us, that global linkage of when we're talking about science, technology, innovation.
Absolutely, Katie, and thank you for that question. If we think about the USAID Feed the Future Labs that the college has been fortunate to lead, those didn't happen by chance. What they really reflect is a series of decades really worth of investment in innovation and discovery in specific areas that fit for Kansas. And, I think that's really the mark of an engaged and impactful land-grant university. Sorghum and millet innovation, minimizing post-harvest loss, sustainable intensification, and then there's a 4th one applied that deals with applied wheat genomics. And again, what that reflects is we were successful in those areas because we had developed faculty expertise over the years within those particular subject matter areas. And there were opportunities to leverage that expertise globally. If we focus, for example, on the applied wheat genomics laboratory, this particular actually all of these labs are coming to or in their 10th year, so they're either going to be renewed or more likely translated into the next iteration of what we do in those particular areas. This lab applied something called genomic selection to really address problems with wheat production in South Asia and India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Nepal. And this wouldn't have been possible without the technology that came about as a result of modern wheat genomics and wheat genetic analysis. That impact, which is now actually releasing varieties in those countries that are adapted to those countries, have spun off technology that our wheat breeders, in fact, are putting into practice currently. So it's a circular kind of thing. The chairman spoke of food security. We think that's a real thing and one in which labs like that entering into countries where there is severe poverty and food security issues can only be a positive going forward, not just for the U.S., but for the world, really. And yet they boomerang back and provide technology back into the most sophisticated aspects of wheat innovation here. And there's so many interactions here. The chairman mentioned the Wheat Innovation Center that we interact with very, very directly. And that's really a part of what we do as a land-grant university. Katie invited additional comments. There is one related to that has relevance to the Farm Bill and very obviously with Doug Steele here and the mention that I'm part of a national group of agriculture deans, the Policy Board of Directors. One of the things that underpins that duration of innovation, and you would say that things like plant breeding and livestock selection, they're not projects, they're processes that go across multiple years and multiple decades. And that steady funding, both public that allows us to leverage private support for these kinds of efforts, is so terribly important. And I'd be remiss, of course, not to mention, I should say, our real interest in addressing what I think is a really, really critical need, not just here at Kansas State University, but nationwide in terms of a threat to our land-grant university system, and that's the fact that we have a huge backlog of deferred maintenance in our buildings that support, and laboratories, greenhouses, those kinds of things that support food and ag research, and their opportunity, and I know the Congressman is very supportive of this effort, to really get some serious dollars behind addressing that real problem. And so we're looking forward to that. This will allow us to continue to not only invest in food and agriculture innovation and research here in the United States, but will allow us also to realize our global impact like we've done so far with these Feed the Future labs.
That's K-State College of Agriculture Dean and Director of K-State Research and Extension, Ernie Minton, and U.S. Representative Glenn Thompson of Pennsylvania, Chairman of the House Agriculture Committee, with some of their thoughts from this week's panel discussion on the role of innovation in global food systems. Katie Lee, Vice President for Government Affairs with Farm Journal Foundation, was the panel moderator. The panel was part of a listening tour for the 2023 Farm Bill. This is Agriculture Today.
You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we are joined now by Chad Epler. He is a Kansas producer as well as the secretary for the Kansas Corn Growers Association. So, Chad, thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome. Pleasure to be here.
You're joining us today over the phone because we're going to be talking about the farms workshops that we've been previewing the last several weeks now with several different guests. But you're joining us today because you're really offering a producer perspective in all of this.
Yeah, right when they come out with this, I got information from our county extension agent that this was going to go on. And as a former educator, I'm always interested about the education of not just young people, but really anybody. And this was an opportunity to bring in scientists, people that work in the lab, and connect them with producers who have boots on the ground every day and find out what are the issues that they could maybe help us with. And I think it's just a unique connection. And so being a part of that the first year really I thought it was pretty cool. And then COVID, we had that issue and didn't have it, but come back last year. So I hope we continue to do this. It is a unique opportunity for producers to be a part of.
Absolutely. And you mentioned you've been a part of it from the beginning, really, with that first, event. What's really kept you hooked since then?
I think just the educational vantage point. That first year, I would see scientists, and we had scientists and lab folks come from Arizona State, Virginia Tech, Pitt State, Kansas State, and they maybe would understand some topics and some of the things that, we're dealing with on the farm. And some did not. And so you got that wow look. And I think it was, to me, when you see that wow look, it's an opportunity to educate. And once those folks kind of understood, what we're dealing with here, whether it's a livestock issue, a crop issue, a chemical issue, any kind of, ag issue that we have here locally, then they start piecing it together and go, well, maybe there's a way that we can help from our seat. And so there's that connection, and that's what keeps me very interested is that wow factor. And, somebody learns something for the first time, and there might be a solution somewhere hidden, maybe in their minds, somebody else's mind, but it takes a connection and that spark. And I think that's what the farms program, I think, does.
an opportunity to draw inspiration from both of these communities, producers and scientists alike, in problem solving. So, Chad, I know that you said, you've been to the last two that have been put on and you're hoping this event continues. And this year they're actually shaking it up a bit with how they're doing the programming. This year they're going to be doing these farms workshops in 1 hour increments on each day of the 4-State Farm Show, which is taking place May 19th through the 21st. So going into it this year, what can you really expect, do you think, to see in those 1 hour increments each of those days?
That is a great question. And I wish I had a really good answer for you, but I don't. The thing that I would hope to see is I would hope to see an engagement of the university of folks and the folks that, the growers, the producers, that connection, and allowing the producer to voice the things that are, problems on their farm, whether that's a net wrap issue, whether that's plastic containers being an issue, and have those university folks and those scientists listen and maybe provide some instant feedback right there. In an hour, it's hard to do what we did in those other workshops that took all day and we had several sessions, but you can reach more people, I think, this way. And I think maybe there was some, some aspect of that, hey, we need to reach more people. And this is a great way to do it at the 4-State Farm Show in Pittsburgh. So hopefully it works. But I'm also optimistic that we'll come back with a full program maybe next year.
And, you have a role with the Kansas Corn Growers Association. So you mentioned beforehand when we went on air that this is also an opportunity for you in that role, too, to really learn what the needs are for other producers. Absolutely.
I think that being in a leadership role, such as, the Kansas Corn Growers, you want to make sure that your ears are always open and that you listen. And I always try to make sure that I'm listening to what is being said and who is saying it, because you never know that just because it's not an issue at your farm, just because that, the net wrap is not a factor here, it might be to somebody else. And so I think the more that we connect with our fellow growers and producers, and then reach out, the associations, and that could be just networking, connections, talking, letting them know that, hey, here's a unique opportunity with the farms program that we can reach people that, they want to find a scientific way to solve a problem that's happening on your farm. I think it's well worth the time.
It's a unique situation, like you just mentioned. It's not an opportunity that comes up every day. So would that really be your encouragement for other producers to really come out and take the time, the 1 hour out of each of these days, potentially at the 4-State Farm Show, to speak with these scientists?
Oh, I think it'd be a really unique opportunity. I mean, I've been to farm shows and been to farm shows on the other side when, in a booth, and people go to farm shows to see what they want to see. That's what it is. But how can you get somebody to stop and really be interested in what you're going to talk about? Because, I mean, don't people go to farm shows for the free stuff, right? You walk out of there with a bag of stuff. No, really. I hope they take the time to actually stop and listen and engage, because that's what they want. That's what the universities want from us. And who better to get that information than the folks that are on the ground, at, ground zero, working every day, having these issues, dealing with things. Like I said, whether it's a crop or livestock issue, maybe somebody can help. And I think that would be something that we all need to probably engage in.
Absolutely. A win-win situation across the board in all of these areas for producers, scientists, and then ultimately the community at the end of the day once this research does get going. So once again, everyone, that is the farms workshops that are going to be taking place May 19th through the 21st during the 4-State Farm Show. Chad, I can't thank you enough for joining us today and talking about your experience with this program and encouraging others to get involved as well.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. And if you can keep the temperatures above freezing, we would appreciate it.
I'll try my best. Once again, everyone, that was Kansas Corn Growers Association Secretary and Kansas producer himself, Chad Epler, joining us to talk about the upcoming Farms Workshops taking place again May 19th through the 21st during the 4-State Farm Show. Before we cut to a short break, we're tuning in to a quick USDA Newslines with Rod Bain, where he covers new meat and poultry processing expansion grants announced through the USDA.
2 recently announced grant programs are among the latest USDA offerings designed to expand independent and local meat and poultry processing facilities, and in turn, increase supply chain resiliency.
It's for 2 programs, the Indigenous Animal Harvesting and Meat Processing Capacity Grant Program, as well as the Local Meat Capacity Grant Program.
Agriculture Undersecretary for Marketing and Regulatory Programs, Jenny Moffitt, says a total availability of up to $125 million is available through the 2 programs.
Really addressing some of the gaps that small and underserved producers have faced for some time.
So in breaking down the 2 grant programs, first,
the Indigenous Animal Harvesting and Meat Processing Grant Program, we call it the Indigenous Animals Grant Program, is $50 million in funding to expand or enhance the processing capacity for tribal governments and within their communities. So this will fund projects that will improve harvesting, processing, manufacturing, storage, transportation, wholesaling, or distribution of meat from indigenous animals such as bison, reindeer, or salmon in tribal communities.
Then with the Local Meat Capacity Grant Program,
we call it Local MCAP, we have $75 million in funding through the American Rescue Plan to fund and to support meat and poultry processors with smaller scale projects with the goal to increase processing capacity and availability for a variety of local and regional livestock producers. Eligible applicants are meat and poultry processors who are domestically owned and who have facilities physically located here in the United States and our territories.
The Undersecretary notes an interesting aspect to the Local Meat Capacity Grant Program.
There's going to be funding for 2 different types of projects. One is processing expansion projects. This will fund grants to increase the processing capacity for privately held facilities, including equipment purchases and facility upgrades. And then the other will be a simplified application project for equipment only that will fund the purchase of up to 5 pieces of equipment with no match funding requirement.
Applications for these grants are due July 19th. With more information available online at www.usda.gov/meat.
And important for both, especially since we're reaching applications and applicants who may not have background in applying for federal grant programs, is that we're making technical assistance available for the application process, as well as if they receive grant funding through the whole process as well, through the Meat and Poultry Processing Capacity Technical Assistance Program.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today.
This is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. The Kansas Garden Guide has undergone a major makeover to better reflect the needs and experiences of a wide range of Kansas gardeners, especially new gardeners. Rebecca McMahon, administrator of Kansas State University's Local Food Systems Program, says the guide needed to be updated to reflect changes in practices as well as the way people think about and approach gardening. Rebecca, first off, maybe just some background on how this updated version came about.
The Kansas Garden Guide has been around for a long, long time. In fact, I have a 1983 copy that's only about 22 pages, line drawings, and, I'm sure a very modern for the time, full-color cover. So the guide itself has been around for quite a long time. I've even had folks tell me they've got versions from the 70s and earlier. And so, as with many things, every so often they need a little bit of a refresher and an update and some changes to better reflect the needs of the gardeners that are using the guide. And so it had been a little bit over 10 years since the Garden Guide had been updated. And so that is what we were hoping to do, is go back in and give the whole thing a refresh and an update from the previous version.
Let's talk about maybe some of the people who have contributed to this. You've got people from entomology, plant pathology, and even a food safety specialist.
Exactly. A lot of the content of the guide was built on the work of previous extension horticulture specialists, and then the last couple edits of the guide have included information from entomology, plant pathology, and like you said, this year we added Dr. Londa Nwadike, the K-State food safety specialist, because as we're all aware, people want their food to be safe and healthy. So we wanted to make sure that our content regarding harvest and storage and cleaning and care of our produce was up to par as well.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the things that are included in this edition. Maybe first off, some things that might be new that weren't included in some of the previous editions.
There's several new things, and of course, some of it's just update of the style and the content. Overall, theme-wise, I think one of the big changes is there's a lot more emphasis in this guide overall on options for folks with smaller gardens, like we often see in our more urban settings, or container or accessible gardens for folks that either don't have space or the physical ability to have a large traditional type of garden. So we have a lot more information for those different types of gardening situations that folks may find themselves in. And we've added a lot of content with new gardeners in mind. You know, that's one of the things that I really noticed when I started looking at older versions of the guide, is there was this assumption that people using the guide had grown up as gardeners, you know, that they'd grown up on a farm where they grew a lot of their own vegetables as just one of the things that the farm family did, that they were talking to people who had just grown up around growing fruits and vegetables and had been doing it their whole lives. And what we see anymore is that many of our gardeners are not coming to it with that experience. You know, whether it was their parents that didn't grow up around a garden, or their grandparents or their great-grandparents, somewhere along the line, a generation or two generations didn't have that gardening experience. So we added quite a bit of content that helps folks that have maybe never had a garden or didn't have that experience of having a garden at another stage of their life, because it's just a different knowledge base. And so we needed to have information for those types of gardeners.
That's Rebecca McMahon, administrator of Kansas State University's Local Food Systems Program, with information on the newly updated Kansas Garden Guide. To order the guide, visit bookstore.ksre.ksu.edu or contact your local county or district extension office. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.